general sonic tendency to pound you in the face, that really hurt. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spinner Reviews, bringing you a list that's only about 4 weeks overdue, I hope you don't mind. So 2016, etc, etc, etc. However, one true saving grace of this past year, in my mind and in the mind of many other people, was in its album output. Like, this is easily the biggest concentration of fantastic releases I've seen since I've started closely following this stuff in around 2013. Ironically, this is also the year I decided to completely derail my channel and only review about an album a month, but I digress. And I'll be getting into why exactly I believe that's the case as this video moves along. So let's get the obvious disclaimers out of the way. And everything that will be linked in the description. And on with the list. Because damn it, if M. Night Shyamalan can release something in mid-January and get a decent response, then why can't I? I talked about these guys back in reviews and haikus, but I don't think I did them the proper justice there. I got into this Canadian indie pop duo back in 2012 from a Sub Pop compilation, and they were getting a good amount of hype and buzz at the time. Unfortunately, the long wait up until the sophomore album left them unfortunately getting unfairly passed over by a lot of people. Soft Hate keeps a lot of the same reverb-touched dream pop of their debut with Slideshow Effect, while shaking off a lot of the obvious Beach House comparisons they were getting at the time, thanks to some punchier and kind of more experimental drum work, some catchier melodies, and even a few dirtier guitar riffs scattered throughout this thing that really give it an extra dynamic. Lyrically, it's also pretty intriguing, being the story of the narrator as someone from their abandoned past tries to reconnect with them, and the kind of conflicting emotions surrounding that. There's a certain contrast with the softer, more subdued musical style that I really dig, and it even gives the more explosive moments here some real emotional weight. Oh, and one more thing I gotta mention. When I pre-ordered this, I got a gold cassette and some custom signed Polaroid pictures. There's no real connection to anything with the album. It is just a really cool package. Moving on. And on the note of 4-year wait since 2012, we have the new Congo's record, coming just a couple years after they broke through the mainstream with my favorite hit song of 2014, Come With Me Now. This follow-up finds them a lot more tightly focused, especially thematically, as they slyly tackle the titular concepts all across the spectrum. Religious dogma on the right, self-centered idealism on the left, hedonism, the singularity. It leaves no one in society that falls into these kind of traps out of the line of fire. And combined with Congo's general sonic tendency to pound you in the face with their percussion and gang vocals over these great hooks, it makes for a truly powerful reality check of a record. Oh my god, I forgot to put the computer in sleep mode. You know, for some reason leading up to this record, I totally forgot how much I loved Jimmy Eat World's whole discography, but even then I consider this a real revitalization for the band. As usual, Jim Adkins never wastes a note vocally on these compositions, which follow both in the pretty alternative and pop rock stylings of the past, as well as some new ground. Those moments when the distortion gets crazier, or there's even some 60s pop influence creeping into their usual sound, it makes for their most consistently engaging record probably since Futures. Lyrically, a lot of it is admittedly familiar ground, but rather than just being a pandering rehash like some bands from this era have been doing them in 2016, it feels more than anything like a mature update on their typical formula, I suppose. Just great work all around. Oh, you got me waiting around for your call. My faith is patient, but it's hitting a wall. I swear on the book you're gonna miss me. Kiss me if we're not gonna talk. So, when I reviewed that last Neon Trees album back in my dark, early iPhone days, one complaint I decided to leave out of that video just for the sake of the comments, was that for all the press at the time surrounding Tyra Glenn, their frontman, coming out as gay, the album they were promoting at the time was their most light and frankly sterile to date. It honestly almost came off to me as a marketing gimmick more than anything else. But now I can see he was saving everything for his solo debut, which is a heartbreaking yet strangely empowering 13-track onslaught against the Mormon Church in the face of both his personal changes and some new anti-gay laws being passed on their side recently. It's an incredibly candid pop record where, even as a Christian, I found myself deeply empathizing and even to an extent agreeing with a lot of his points. In fact, one really cool thing he does in his lyricism on a few tracks here is give them a certain double meaning as a breakup song with both the church and an ex. You get it? Because excommunication means being cast out from a church, and it's also communication with an ex. And it's all surrounded in this semi-80s aesthetic that, unlike with pop psychology, actually goes past a lot of its influences, fusing the darker style of, say, Depeche Mode and some other more new wavy stuff, and fusing it with some sonic and structural choices that honestly wouldn't feel out of place on a Joel Little produced project. Even with its minor flaws here and there, this is one 2016 album that I'm just kicking myself for not giving a full review to. I'm gonna sound like a walking think piece when I say this, but this is an important album that way more people should have paid attention to. I'm just really curious to see how this will impact Neon Trees' direction going forward. Assuming the Air members haven't been scared off yet, but we'll see.
Air 'em out, let 'em breathe. Air 'em out, got the fire. Air 'em out, wanna sing. Air 'em out, dude. Should've made the noose a little tighter, cause it ain't nobody dead, just some motherfucking riders.
I can't remember a year where I've loved as many hip-hop albums as I have in 2016. That said, we're gonna start off with the one where it may be debatable whether it's too weird to even fit in that category. I actually reviewed their last EP, Wriggle, which came out just a few months before this one, and in retrospect, this is definitely the project more worth delving into. Clipping has always had an abrasive, abstract take on hip-hop, but this takes it to a whole other level. Here, Davi Diggs and crew give us a sci-fi space opera for the ages, backed up with production that's at times so ambient and devoid of any traditional sense of rhythm, it's kind of mind-blowing to believe someone would be able to successfully rap over it. And yet it gives this really unsettling vibe that pulls you further and further into this dystopian stage being set here in the story, especially with the recurring slave song motif scattered throughout this thing. It might not be all that easy to just pluck out one track to vibe to, aside from maybe Air 'em Out or to an extent A Better Place, but as a whole, it's a truly inventive exercise in what can be done within an established genre.
You got me brainwashed, you got me so lost, you got me fucked up like you. You got me drugged up, you got me undone, falling in love like you do. And if you lie down with wolves, you learn to howl.
Literally and figuratively, bringing things down to earth a little, every year there are a couple indie pop rock debuts from bands bubbling around that whole Alt Nation, 901X kind of world that completely blow me away. And this year, that band is the power trio Dreamers. It's a short but effective and fun as hell record, with fuzzed out production that sounds massive and stylized without feeling overly processed, undeniably infectious choruses, and a charming little narrative going throughout this thing about following this awkward dude at a party who has a fling with this girl that he meets there that just snowballs further and further as the album goes along. Just in general, look out for these guys. And if you'll allow me to use my one cheesy reviewer line for this video, this album does exist, and it's fantastic. Moving on.
Why should I be scorned like some catalyst for famines when it's me who's been exiled in apartments? Oh, must I always be?
Phew! Finally, an album I already talked about on this channel. Reviews down there, people still aren't giving this album the time of day for the reasons I'm listing down there. That motorcycle doesn't want me to continue with this album on this list. Why should I?
So I'll be waiting when we're older and all my motives are showing shoulder, and I know I can't find the things for which I'm searching in.
Some longtime viewers of this channel might remember I did an interview with this guy a couple of years ago. Well, this past year he got signed to Tooth and Nail Records and put out a wonderfully sentimental slice of folk rock on his debut. There's a nice sense of dynamics across this thing, seamlessly blending these intimate acoustic ballads with some fantastic builds and crescendos. He knows exactly when to bring what extra instrumentation in to give it just the right effect for what he's talking about. And on that note, this is a very autobiographical record. Like you could gather from the title, there's a major theme of familial loss throughout this thing, and how that can fuel a need to make a major change in your life. The real life connection here, just FYI, is that he went on a walk a few years ago from San Diego to San Francisco, and especially as someone from that same sort of area as him that's been doing a lot of transitioning in the last few months, it hit me in a very distinct way on a few of these tracks. A couple videos ago, I briefly mentioned the idea of promoting your own local talent, and this is easily the best example of that I found in 2016. Sure, he's open for the likes of John Foreman and James Bay, but Tyson could definitely use a lot more exposure, and I'm glad to give the little I can here. Speaking of albums that hit me in a very distinct way, both surrounding death, eerily enough, let me talk about the first one on here that's also on everyone else's. Now, before any claims are made, let me say that even on January 8th and 9th when I was listening to this, I knew it'd be an easy shoe-in for this list. Even taking his death out of the equation, for someone that's been working to innovate for nearly half a century on his 27th album, to still pull together tracks with this much dense emotional content and crazy musicianship, especially in the drumming, which really has to be pointed out on this thing, and ambitious song structures, all in this bizarre, manic package, is something truly incredible. And sure, some of this might have already been employed on earlier Bowie albums that people may hold in slightly higher regards, and I just haven't gotten around to hearing in their entirety yet. But both on its own merits and as a conscious sort of farewell from a legendary figure in music as a whole, it really is an album like no other, any way you look at it.
Ain't it funny how it happens? Ain't it funny how it happens? Ain't it?
So recently I made this cameo in an LP Club video.
I don't know what to say about this album, but here's someone who does.
Comparing it to what he showed on Triple X as the whacked out 1960s cartoon villain or rapper that somehow makes hardcore drug use sound both enlightening and traumatizing in equally hilarious ways, on Atrocity Exhibition, Danny didn't just reach that potential, he reached it, gave it a firm death grip, flung it down to Earth's surface, stuck a flag in it, claimed it as his own city, then as a US territory, seceded from the Union, and used new forms of imperialism to become the new supreme ruler of the game on an empire that promises free dime bags and dare seminars to everyone over the age of 10. That kind of says it all, but I'll add that this is one of the most disgusting, grimy, and bizarrely honest depictions of drug use that you'll ever find on a hip-hop or really any album that I'm aware of. Both the best and the worst in all their deranged extremes, all with a personal lens that makes it all the more, how can I put it, fun-settling. Let's go with that.
My medical history is a course at SUNY Buffalo, charlatan psychiatry and troubleshooting undertow. Nervous in the service still, I'm burger meat and purple pills here. Thank you, but call your name, sure you will.
And yet, with all the mind-blowing experimentation I've talked about with the other two hip-hop albums here, at the end of the day, it all goes back to pure, unfiltered lyricism. And one of the best discoveries I've made this past year was the last couple solo albums by Aesop Rock. The guy just, first of all, has this unique charisma in his delivery that's a little off kilter, but no less laser focused. It's rare that he goes more than a couplet or two without some reference or wordplay that totally catches you off guard and then engrosses you even further into whatever he might be talking about at the time, just making it this really fun puzzle to follow along with and piece together. And it helps with the more grounded and personal angle that this record in particular is taking, where family, other rappers, therapy, painting, and his cat are all equally compelling subjects. He's also producing all his own beats now, and injecting them all with an eerie mood and hard-hitting rhythm section that always complements the vibe that he's going for. This is without question the most well-rounded hip-hop album I've heard in a while, and I just can't wait to dig into his earlier stuff later on. So before we get any further, let me say one thing about how exactly my channel's changed in 2016. Since I got rid, for the most part, of the formal reviews, I haven't really had that subconscious need to hide my biases as much as I might have subconsciously done before. As a result, 3 of the top 4 here fall under the distinct category of sad white guys with electric guitars writing sing-along hooks over unique kinds of relatable turmoil. Core. Hey, you know what doesn't get talked about nearly enough in music? Gentrification. At least that's the little revelation I had listening to this record. I heard so much about this guy in the past couple of years, especially on his last couple solo outings, and I'm glad I just managed to hop on the bandwagon with this one. It's an anxiety-ridden but good-hearted account of a guy just wanting to live his underground kind of life without these corporate forces outside his control getting in the way. And it's framed in a way that's a lot more self-critical than that might sound on paper. It's also musically incredibly versatile for its style, with that whole last half in those minute-long tracks kind of feeling like punk rock's answer to the Abbey Road medley. If you've been hearing the buzz about this record and think it might be up your alley, definitely give it a shot.
For goodness sake, I wasn't told you'd be this cold. Now it's my time to depart, unless there change of heart.
Another one I thankfully already reviewed and don't have to devote too much more time to in this video that will inevitably go on a little too long. Watch that and get all my over-analytical thoughts there. The one thing I'll say here is that the only reason it isn't number 1 right now is that I realized that with that narrative I pieced together from the first 11 tracks, it might have actually been better if they took the tracks following it and made like their own separate EP out of that, you know? Sort of an emotion side B kind of way. But either way, it's still an incredibly well thought out pop album that destroyed all my preconception I had about these guys before. And now, our top 2. With very little exaggeration, one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my life. Out of the 4 years I've been keeping track of this stuff, this is by far the most neck and neck number 1 has ever been for me. Both of these albums fit that genre I described earlier. Both of these albums are from acts with decent-sized discographies that I've spent a good chunk of this year diving headfirst into and loving every minute of. I've seen both of them live in some capacity in the last part of the year. I know both these are exhaustive passion projects from their respective frontmen in the scope and subject matter. Most importantly, both of these albums touched my soul in a deep, impactful way, and in the future could very well both land on an all-time favorites list. I thought about averaging individual track scores, maybe even just flipping a coin on camera. So, with all that said, one of these has been praised and revered by all my internet friends. And at the end of the day, ain't I just a contrarian little shit?
It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this. Kill the whale. Kill the whale.
I'm going to keep it a little short here because I'm planning in the near future on doing a whole episode of my podcast, Mad Sounds, probably with a critic named Kevin, dedicated to Will Toledo's staggering 13-album discography under this moniker. But what I will say here, every bit of the hype you've heard behind this thing is 100% justified. This is a sprawling, all-encompassing, heart-wrenchingly earnest record where, when you're not getting wrapped up in the crazy song structures that you wouldn't expect in most hooky garage rock records like this, there will be a line or two in most of these songs that relates from an angle that you might not have expected to be where that relatability will come from. It's blunt, but still artful. It's tightly composed, but very loosely flowing. It's crunchy and intense, but packed with enough of those fantastic melodies that are begging to be screamed along with live, or wherever you might be listening to this. For proof of all of this, look to the Ballad of the Costa Concordia, probably my favorite song, bar none, of 2016. Again, all the publications have also been on this, but for very good reason. And now, my number one album of 2016. Again, keep in mind, I've never been one to make the critical darling my album of the year. No one else put Big Data in 2015 or Bad Sons in 2014. A few did with 21 Pilots in 2013, but they were still definitely an underdog at the time. So here we are, and who better to top this list than, at this point in time, what's still my most recent review.
I am the last of my kind, just a yank in southern battlefields, behind enemy lines, and alone to find out how I wound up here. Every mistake, a reason to run, but a good soldier marches on.
In addition to all that, what makes this a rather unique album of the year for me is that, unlike the past years where I picked like a full-length debut, or at least a label debut, that's just how it kind of turned out, this is just a band whose core sound I've become addicted to over this past year, and whose core sound also gets refined with each subsequent release. Now, I don't want to just summarize the video I did on them, since I want you guys to see it. I mean, Anthony and the guys seem to like it okay. But here's a few reasons. First off, their instrumentation, which has always had this kind of impending, minor progression-filled take on pop punk and punk rock, is more dynamic than ever. Immaculate guitar leads, elaborate vocal harmonies, even some odd time signature changes scattered throughout this thing. In that respect, it's kind of perfect as a gateway for new listeners, and how it really hits the whole spectrum they've shown by this point in their decade-plus long career. But you also had some curveballs in there to really catch those cult members off guard, like the clear Springsteen worship on Mary and the vintage rock and roll chord structures on The Ghost that they totally make their own, kind of sounding like a song that they reinvented for their covers EP from a few years back. And that's not even touching on the lyrical themes, which were generally the main theme of that video. But what Vacancy shows is a perfect example of how to turn insane personal turmoil into art that's compelling, both in and out of that context. It never really comes off whiny or overly bitter without justification. And believe it or not, coming from a songwriter point of view, that's a very difficult skill to master. One last thing I'll say in relation to this record. So, right now, I'm in the finishing stages of my debut album, which I'm hoping to formally announce in the next month or two or three, give or take some delays. But I've been asking myself, what are the kind of albums I would want my work to be named next to? Not for the sake of imitating or anything like that, but just in the name of capturing a lot of that same general appeal. And I think Vacancy's inspired that in that regard more than any other recent release, really. In addition to just being a fantastic piece of work that's been, by the way, criminally overlooked by their scene. Turns out it doesn't make it true, has this whole other meaning I was totally missing, and it gives the song even more emotional weight, and okay, I'm done here. So yeah, that's it. Finally it. That's my favorite albums of 2016, my list. I'm proud of it. A few days from when this video is up, I'm going to be posting a collage of my top 50 on Twitter. That'll be linked in the description, or you can just follow me on Twitter, whatever. 2016 was a weird transitional year for this channel, I'm aware. I'm going to try to focus things down to what exactly I want it to be, even though I've kind of said that every year, but I guess I can't make any promises. But yeah, I'm hoping to keep the podcast going stronger than ever, maybe throwing in some different sort of video content on the channel as well between those. Share this video around if you found it interesting or whatever my usual outro is. It's like 6 in the morning. I gotta go to work in an hour. Bye.